Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar on curbside recycling success stories. I am Jennifer Dabbs, the Director of Outreach for CERTIC, and I will be managing the webinar today. As a reminder, as attendees, you are on mute during the entire presentation, but after you're logged in, you should be able to see in your sidebar an area for asking questions. We have a full hour planned for you, but hope to allow time at the end of the webinar to address those questions. So feel free to type in your thoughts at any time during the webinar. And in the event we don't get to them all, we will have the presenters provide responses and send that through a follow-up email after this session concludes. The webinar is also being recorded, and CERTIC will have it available for viewing by the first of next week under our webinars section of our website, which is www.serdc.org. With that said, this webinar is brought to you by the Southeast Recycling Development Council. Our goal is to promote sustainability in the Southeast by connecting local supply with regional demand of recovered materials, largely within the 11 states that we serve, but a lot of times that even goes outside those boundaries. We operate largely from membership fees, and our sponsor level members, as you see here, without their tremendous support, we would not be able to accomplish all the work that we're able to do in the Southeast and beyond. I would like to now introduce our moderator, Susan Robinson. Susan is the Federal Public Affairs Director for Waste Management and also a board member of the Southeast Recycling Development Council. Thanks, Susan.
Great. Can you hear me, Jen?
I can.
Good. Okay, I'm going to talk a little slowly because we're still getting quite a few people signing in. I think it takes a couple of minutes once you get past the hour, but I'll talk slowly before I turn it over to Michelle because I do want to allow certainly full time for our great speakers today, so I don't want to take up any of their time. I'll start by thanking CERTIC for sponsoring this webinar. I'm on the board of CERTIC and couldn't be more proud of the work that the organization does. I think this is just one more example of really bringing together excellent speakers to be able to provide good information about what's going on with recycling in the US today. So I'd like to welcome each of you and to thank you for joining us on the webinar. It's just a great lineup. I'm just really excited to listen to each of our speakers. You're going to hear coast to coast and on the ground real success stories for ensuring and improving material quality in curbside recycling programs. As you listen to each of the speakers, please take notes so that you can ask questions when we're done. And as a reminder, we'll field those questions. We've got a question box on your screen, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to answer them at the end. And if not, absolutely, we'll be sure to get back to you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Michelle Metzler is Public Outreach Manager for Waste Management in the Pacific Northwest. That's Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Alaska, and British Columbia. She's been working directly with customers for over a decade, providing information to ensure that customers know how to recycle right. She leads a team of professionals and interns who have been able to keep inbound contamination in the Pacific Northwest under 10%, which is really low considering when I talk to folks across the country, I hear about a 25% inbound contamination rate, but in the Pacific Northwest overall, those communities are running at about 10% or less. So Michelle, I'd like to turn it over to you now to tell us how you've achieved the success. It's all yours.
All right, thank you so much, and good afternoon. Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to be here to share more about the work that we do in this region of the country. So I'm going to start off with just a brief overview of the Pacific Northwest. So a lot of our cities here have been early adopters of curbside recycling. So many of the recycling programs in this region have been in existence for 20 or 30 years. So recycling is really embedded in the culture of a lot of the communities that we service. The statewide recycling rates are quite high. In both Washington and Oregon, the statewide rate is over 50%, and some of the cities have recycling rates over 65% for the residential recycling stream. So cities like Portland or Seattle are definitely leaders in this area. And then in addition to that, we have low contamination rates. So between 5 and 10% at our MRFs is what we typically see, which, as Susan mentioned, is quite low for contamination, and feel really lucky to be working in cities that are so dedicated to advancing recycling. So, as I mentioned, many of these communities were early adopters of curbside recycling programs, especially in the Portland and Seattle areas. So in 1986, the Portland area began collecting recycling curbside monthly and had about 10% participation in their first year. And then 2 years later, the city of Seattle launched curbside recycling in 1988, and it was by subscription only. Yet within 1 year, 80% of households signed up for collection. And at this point, it was 3 source-separated bins. And this was the first program in the country to collect mixed paper. So I think Seattle really highlights a lot of the ethic of this region. So having a subscription-based program and having 80% sign up within the first year definitely shows that recycling is something that is important to folks that live in this area. And even since the 80s, recycling education has always been a part of recycling education programs. You can see some of my favorite classic recycling guides that show, how to recycle materials. Some of the same messaging that we use today about cleaning bottles and taking caps off. So because these programs have been in place for so long, it's really set us up for success throughout the years. So now I'm going to share a little bit about the things that we're doing today to keep recycling programs strong and keep them growing and keep participation high. So I think the keys to success that I really see and why the Pacific Northwest has had such successful recycling programs is really strong partnerships between waste management and other haulers and the municipalities. So we work very closely with our city partners to ensure that we're delivering programs that meet the needs of the communities. We also have dedicated funding for recycling education because waste management and these cities that we serve see the need for education as part of our recycling collection program. That's been really important. We also focus on delivering programs that emphasize research and tactics that have been proven to be effective in changing behavior. And then we use a variety of outreach tools to meet the needs of the various communities that we serve. So I'm going to review a few of our tactics, which include digital advertising, direct mail, in-person conversations, cart tagging, and a few others. And we don't deploy all of these tactics every year in every community, but we're able to select campaigns that focus on community-specific needs, values, and the current recycling programs. So a lot of our current recycling education programs were built upon a study that we did in 2013. We really wanted to take a deeper dive and look at why residents recycle, what types of materials are they recycling well, what types of recyclables are still ending up at the garbage, and in general, what do residents think about recycling? So we conducted a variety of surveys and waste sorts, and the findings from this have really helped shape our education and outreach programs. So not surprisingly, one of the things that we found was that residents are highly motivated to recycle. They consider recycling to be a very important thing for themselves and their neighbors to do. So it's great to have a general ethic to build upon and values to include in our education materials. And then we also found that even though people value recycling and recycle regularly, they're still throwing away recyclables. So mixed paper was the #1 material found in recycling carts, and it was found in almost 90% of recycling carts. So it's fairly surprising to us. And then recyclable plastic was the #2 item found in recycling carts, and nearly 85%, or just over 85% of residents had recyclable plastics in their garbage. So knowing that, we dug deeper into why those materials are ending up in the garbage. So for mixed paper, we found that the key barriers to recycling were concerns about privacy. So a lot of documents contain personal information, and residents were a little bit leery about recycling some of that material, not knowing where it was going. There was also confusion over whether some types of material were recyclable or not. And then with plastics, some of the key barriers to recycling is the need to rinse or clean containers before recycling, confusion over what types of plastic are recyclable, and they're confused over if caps or lids are recyclable. So because some of the key barriers that we discovered were confusion, that really highlights the need for education and outreach programs. You know, in some cases, the barriers to not recycling are lack of carts or lack of access to recycling. And for the most part, what we find is that in our region, a lot of it is just confusion, which makes education and outreach a great way to help improve recycling programs. So over the years, we've done a number of campaigns that highlight the findings of that behavior study. So a couple of key campaigns. We did one around paper, and because paper was the #1 thing ending up in the garbage. And as a follow-up to our behavior study, we did a capture rate study to determine which types of mixed paper were being thrown away in the garbage. And we found that paper has an 80% capture rate, which means that 80% of the paper that people dispose of was ending up in the recycling. So even though we found a lot of paper in the garbage, people are still doing a really good job of paper. It's just that there's such a high volume of paper, it shows up in the garbage fairly often. And the category of paper that had the lowest capture rate and was generated in large quantities was reading or household papers. So that's things like junk mail, like some magazines, thank you cards, calendars, notebooks, things that are generated not necessarily on a daily basis. And so we created a campaign that featured a thank you card because residents were doing such a good job of recycling and recycle 80% of their paper. And since greeting cards were a type of paper that was recycled at a low rate, so we really wanted to thank people for recycling. And then in the thank you card, which we did digital and direct mail, we highlighted the types of paper that could be recycled to help overcome that barrier of confusion. We've also deployed a plastic-specific campaign that provided clarity on the type of plastic that can be recycled and instructions for cleaning containers, which we found was another key barrier. Another one of our key programs that we run each year is a college intern program called the Waste Management Recycle Corps. Each year we hire 10 to 14 interns to canvass communities to talk to residents about recycling. The interns provide technical assistance and education to multifamily residents and also attend community events like street fairs or farmers markets or go to grocery stores to just really engage with residents, learn more about their challenges in recycling, and be able to provide boots on the ground support and answers about common recycling questions. And then last year we launched a mobile app called WM Cartwise. And so this is an app that folks can download onto their smartphones, and it has 2 features. One is a search feature where folks can type in something that they want to know if it's recyclable or compostable or garbage, and then there's basically a waste directory. And then it also features a sorting game where people can try their luck at sorting various materials and see if they get things in the right bin. And in the first year, it's had 8,000 downloads, which is about 5% of the customers in this particular community. So we feel like that's a really high engagement for any sort of education tool. And we're actually surprised that 5% of customers had downloaded it. And I think what's even more interesting is that people continue to use it. So we've had 55,000 material searches over the last year, and we're regularly getting thousands of searches every month. So that's thousands of customer questions that are getting answered. And these people, may have called us or emailed us to ask those questions, but I think a lot of those questions would have just gone unanswered. So it's a really great way to reach select audiences. And the other really interesting thing about the application is it provides us data that we can use to provide even better recycling education programs. So whenever people search for a material, it gets tracked. So you'll see on this slide the top 10 materials that are searched. So people are confused about, what do I do with mattresses? What do I do with styrofoam? What do I do with pill bottles, etc. And so that really gives us good feedback about, these are the things that people are confused about. And then also in the waste sorting game, the things that people get wrong the most, which would be the top 10 misunderstood materials, a lot of these things are plastics. Again, mattresses come up, shredded paper, coffee cups. So this just helps us get a better sense of what people are still asking questions about, so that we can make sure that we're delivering education programs that address these. We also want to be sure that we're servicing and providing recycling education to our entire community. So we've had a real emphasis on engaging diverse communities and communities that speak English less than very well. So we have recycling education flyers in 8 languages that have been transcreated to be culturally relevant. So transcreation is the process of not only translating materials into a different language, but really getting a good understanding of a particular culture and seeing what items would be particularly relevant. So for example, a certain type of soda might be purchased more prominently in certain cultures than others. And so highlighting that brand of soda will help make the flyer resonate more with that audience. So we have materials available. We also do in-language cultural events where we'll have a booth with education staff that's bilingual and can answer questions directly with residents. And then we also have a digital and direct mail campaign for Spanish-speaking residents. We created, it's an Ode to Recyclables campaign that features art, poetry, and music that was created by the Latino community for the Latino community. And we really had some great feedback from folks in this community about the need for recycling information, and just appreciating how the content really is tailored towards that, to their community. We also provide feedback at the curb. So we have contamination oops tags that are applied by drivers to carts that have visible contamination. A number of these graphics are provided by the Recycling Partnership, who will be speaking later on this webinar. They have a lot of great tools that we use here in the Pacific Northwest. And then we've also deployed cart tagging efforts with single message tags. This tag that's shown here is a tag that encourages residents to compost their food scraps. And we found that single message tags, whether about composting or recycling, help to increase participation. Cart tagging is a great way to reach people that might not read their mail, or you might not be able to reach with digital advertising because it's on their cart when they go to pull it in from the curb at night. And then lastly, we focus our messaging to keep the content simple and digestible for residents. So Waste Management has a national recycling campaign called Recycle Often, Recycle Right, where we really are trying to keep it simple and ask residents just to do 3 things: recycle all bottles, cans, paper, keep items clean and dry, and no plastic bags. We know that recycling is complicated, and a lot of our residents want to know the details about bottle caps or plastic film or some of these other materials, but for the most part, most people just want to know the basics of what to do. And so Recycle Often, Recycle Right is a great campaign to keep things really simple. And then in light of National Sword and Waste Management's efforts to reduce contamination, we're also emphasizing clean, dry, and empty with a bit more specificity. So there's a graphic on this slide that shows, for example, dry, don't leave cardboard out in the rain, or keep lid closed. So we're working to fine-tune our messaging to ensure that the materials that are coming to our MRFs, meet the new standards. And so I guess I've covered a lot of different programs in the last 15 minutes, but want to emphasize that any education effort is a great place to start. It takes time to change behavior and educate residents, and there won't be a one-size-fits-all approach for every community. So my best advice to communities looking to improve recycling is to get to know the community, understand the barriers to recycling and how communities generally receive recycling information, and then deploy tactics that will resonate with the community needs. So thanks so much for having me today, and I look forward to fielding any questions.
Great. We've got a couple already. We'll save till the end. Michelle, that was awesome. Thank you very much. I love the app idea. Great, exciting information, and I think really encouraging information on the success you've had in the Northwest. I guess I have a couple takeaways before I turn it over to Bob. It's takeaways on that ongoing education, funding for education, investments in evolutions of your messaging, and then collaboration among governments and recyclers seems to really have made a difference for you in the Northwest. And I think the surveys that you've done are really interesting. And one question I will just ask quickly, is that survey information, is that available for others to see who are on the call?
Absolutely, yeah. We have a website that has all of our research. It's available to anyone who'd like to look at it.
And that's just, what is that? Just if somebody was to Google it, do you have a quick?
I could email the link, and we could follow up after.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you so much. Good. And we'll save the rest of the questions for later. Next, we're going to hear from Bob Capadona from Casella Industries at the opposite end of the country. Bob's vice president of Casella and has been in the trenches for over 25 years, working with communities in the northeastern United States. Most recently, Bob's been working diligently with communities in the greater New England area, implementing programs to improve the quality of material collected for recycling. Bob, it's your turn to tell us more about how you're making these improvements in your area.
So thanks, Susan. I appreciate the invite here, and I always, when I do a webinar kind of nationally here, I always apologize in advance on my Boston accent. So if you bear with me with this, I'll go through the 17, 18 slides here rather quickly, just for the fact that I think the value in all of these webinars and presentations is in the Q&A. So knowing this is a kind of a national webinar, first few slides just kind of give you a flavor of Casella. Two brothers that started in 1975, Doug and John Casella. One recycling truck, brought it to a public company in the early 90s. And they're both very much involved in the company today. Doug is the chairman of the board and John is CEO of the board. Vertically integrated company, organics, recycling, landfill, hauling, over 850,000 tons of recycling and 400,000 tons of organics. And again, just another visual for the Casella footprint, right? 31 hauling companies, 10 landfills, 52 transfer stations, 12 recycling operations, and 4 organic processing facilities. Just northeast, New England, New York, we have some operations in Pennsylvania. And the recycling arm, Casella, a little flavor there, 12 recycling operations, 6 of them are single stream, again, 850,000 tons a year of recyclables. The Boston Mass MRF, servicing the city of Boston and surrounding suburban area, is one of the largest in the country that processes over 200,000 tons. I should also mention we have our own recycling brokerage arm that moves 100,000 tons annually to direct mill from industrial opportunities, industrial customers. So I'd be a little bit remiss not to mention the national sword here, right? This contamination, it really has been in the fold here for longer than just the national sword. It's been in the forefront. We've been trying to reduce it when most of the country converted to single stream, and we created more conveniency there. We asked everybody to throw everything in the bucket, and guess what? They threw everything in the bucket. And you have some contaminations that an average of anywhere from 20 to 25% from a MRF perspective. But national sword, in short, was the Chinese government to reduce pollution within the country. Also probably to enhance the infrastructure, the recycling infrastructure within the country, and a ban on 24 types, most notably mixed paper grade. And what really has a rippling effect here is that 0.5% carried waste of finished product within the country. And when I say a rippling effect, it's we've had to move material to secondary markets, as most of the country has. And those secondary markets are Asia, Korea, Vietnam, and though not as strict as the 0.5%, but those other secondary markets and even the domestic markets have had those strict specifications of 2% and under of carried waste. So again, the big changes, national sword. But one of the other big changes, just to touch upon in the Northeast here, is we lost our largest glass processor in March. They shut the doors. They handled about 200,000 tons of both bottle bill glass and MRF glass. So in the last 6 months, we've kind of it's been challenging to move glass, and we've kind of landed into the arena of MRF glass being produced into an aggregate. But of course, that's had an economic effect. You don't have the same economics from a bottle to bottle to, as compared to the aggregate market. So in the impacts there, you've seen the single stream mix, the value of it drop 70% over the past year. The mixed paper, glass, and residue make up over 60% of the recycling mix, and now very little value. The mixed paper grade starting to come back a little bit, but you have very little value to that, which has the impact of the whole single stream ton. And again, what gets a little bit lost here is what's happening in national sort of additional transportation costs. We've had, domestically, you've seen electronic logs from long hauling, moving from A to B, and that's, keeping, those truckers honest with regards to making sure that they're fulfilling the DOT regulations, and that's kind of resulted in, 20% less productivity. And, from an export standpoint, you don't have those same containers or containers coming back from China. You're chasing secondary markets. You don't have the same volume coming from Asia, India, and whatnot coming back to the U.S. as you did with China. So we're all kind of chasing the same containers at the pier, if it's in New Jersey or Boston, and that's created some pain with regards to in the economics. You can see there that it's up over 100% a container line shipping one container to those secondary markets. And the impacts to the MRF, it's a manufacturing operation now. It's no longer you just drop it off the recycling facility. I mean, there's a focus on quality. When you have 25% contamination coming in the door and you're trying to produce a 2% and under quality, baled quality, it's very challenging. So, in our MRFs anyways, we've had to add labor. We've, slowed down the lines, and that's kind of created capacity issues up in the Northeast here, right? All those MRFs prior to National Sword were running at capacity, meaning that you couldn't fit another ton within the door there. Now you slow down the lines, and now you've put tons out into the marketplace that don't really have a home, and that's created in a situation where some municipalities have had to go on for a disposal waiver to the local regulators. It's kind of come back in line now, but come the holiday season when we expect it to get a little bit busier, they may create a situation there, a challenge there. We've done a couple of retrofit at some of our smaller MRFs just to kind of clean up the fiber to ensure, again, we make that 2%. And you have that the big focus is on quality. If you think about meeting that 2% and under, you're shipping one container to that secondary market, and it doesn't pass inspection, it's 2% and over, it gets rejected. Coming all the way back to the U.S. is thousands of dollars for rejections. So you have to pay that freight coming back, and you just don't ship one container. We ship 20, 30, 40 at a time, and those rejection dollars add up. So again, it's a big focus on quality as we focus on also contamination coming in the door. So our campaign is a recycle better. You have the recycle rights. We have recycle smart. We're hitting it all, right? The social media, the ads, the web pages. We've created a video. and we try to, these little tag items here, film is definitely the #1 contaminant, the grocery bag, and where you can bring that back, can you recycle better? Please send this back. Electronics, that's, been a big issue with regard to lithium batteries. So, again, there's two ways that, you can address contamination. It's obviously the education here, and I have a slide downstream here that will show how we kind of have a pilot program going, addressing it at the curb. Again, I think this is what you'll see here is back to the basics, right? One of the things that a couple of the states have done up here is a universal list. And this is a good example here of a universal list. The state of Connecticut and Massachusetts went through an exercise of bringing in all of the MRFs within the state. For instance, in Massachusetts is 8 MRFs. They brought in all 8 MRFs and went through each line of material, whether it's fiber, aluminum, metals, plastics, and came up with a universal list that all 8 MRFs were on the same page. And you kind of avoid those that confusion of who takes, a #6, who doesn't. And it was a great exercise. The jury's still out on it. We just went through that exercise 3 months ago in Massachusetts. But you'll see some of the difference here. You don't see a 1 through 7 or any of that. It's kind of like we just wanted to simplify. It says jars, tubs, and lids. And really that message back to the basics. And again, a focus on some of the top 5 items, right? Bag recycling, textiles, just the visuals. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, and you see the red XO and tanglers. The worst contaminants, we have a top 5. And again, I go back to the visuals. You'll see the 2 pictures there. Our major separation in any MRF is disc screens. And the bottom screen is obviously you see the #1 contaminant, film. And when you have that type of film in between the screens, you now develop an ineffectiveness of separation. The top one is what a screen should look like when it's cleaned. So, again, plastic bag and film, #1. Lithium batteries, I just moved that up to #2. It wasn't even in the top 5, but it seems every other week at one of our facilities, we have some smoldering item, whether it's in, the tip floor, it's on the bale, in a bale, on the line. I can tell you this almost can be #1 just for the fact it creates a safety issue. It's one thing to have a contamination like textiles or tanglers, but, safety is the #1 priority in any of our any within the industry, never mind the MRF, within the industry, safety is the #1 priority before productivity and quality. So I'm sure you've heard some of the fires that have gone on around the country, and lots of them are backtracked to lithium batteries. And you see 3 through 5 there, the textiles, tanglers, and food and beverage. And again, I'd be a little bit remiss not to talk about the Northeast weather impacts, right? From November to January, snow, ice balls, weather, it affects the operations tremendously, right? You're trying to separate fiber from containers, and then downstream you pull out the plastics. But when you have that type of snow and you're trying to separate, get a clean separation, weather is a problem. And again, you're trying to meet that 2% and under from a fiber standpoint. So, I would give an example. I think 2 years ago in just the state of Massachusetts, we had over 100 inches of snow. And so from a processing standpoint, you are now slowing down the lines and just to ensure you meet the qualities. So one slide here in the middle of kind of a bin inspection and tagging, we have a small community. We're still working through it in the middle of it, so it will remain unknown for now. But it's a 5-week program. We've extended another 5 weeks. It's simple, one route, 1,000 homes. We sent out 6 bin inspectors. Higher contamination to begin with than we thought, almost 50%. We tagged 30% of them the first week because it's simply opening up the cart, checking what's in top of the cart, and we tagged 30% of them with an oops sticker. As you can see, it's actually one of the carts there. 2 through 4 weeks, you saw the tags reduce dramatically. Week 5, we left bins at the curb, and at each one of these, every week, we did a audit. And it was, you know, an audit of 1,000 pounds, and we did it with the 6 bin inspectors. And over the 5 weeks, you saw a total reduction of 20%. Again, starting with a higher contamination than you normally see in a municipality, but they were very proactive in us trying to. They knew they had a situation there, and we helped. We were both the hauler and the MRF working with the municipality on this. So, you know, at the end of the day, you know, what you can expect here, again, you'll see changes to the acceptable list as what we've seen in, you know, Connecticut and Massachusetts. A renewed focus on contamination. There's got to be a lower tolerance. Again, we're manufacturing plants now. We have to look at that with 25% of contamination coming in the door to meet that 2% and under. You know, we're all going to work through this, and maybe some chargebacks, but you know, this isn't something that, you know, first time in the door, there's a chargeback. We will work with every community and every hauler to ensure that we get to a level that's acceptable, that we can produce a great quality. You'll see I think we're in for a little bit of a long haul here. I don't think China is going to come back. They've pretty much publicly stated that they're looking to eliminate most of their recyclables by 2020. You've seen some of the largest supplier in the largest mill in China invest in U.S. mills. So you may, that's an indication that China probably isn't going to come back. So it's great to see U.S. capacity for the mixed paper grade to develop, but it's millions of dollars of investment that we'll see in lots of retrofitting that probably won't develop over the next until 18, 24 months before it's done. And then during the holiday season, to meet that 2% and under generation typically goes up with the advertisement, the Amazon effect. So, you know, shipping will be tough because you have those holidays. A lot of the holidays are on Fridays and Saturdays. So you'll see slow movement of material. And lastly, I kind of always end on this, kind of one of my favorite slides, and it is internally and externally. It is all about the teamwork, especially from a contamination standpoint. You know, we found this out through the pilot program on the previous slide. There's really 4 folks that need to be on the same page, on the same team, and that's the community, the regulators, the hauler, and the MRF operator, right? Because if you're gonna, education is great, but if you start to do some bin tagging or whatnot, you're gonna have to, you know, those phone calls are gonna come from the consumer to the municipality to the hauler. So, you know, what we found, we had a great plan in place. It was great communication, and if one of those 4 are not on the same page, then you know, you could have, that could be very challenging to kind of the reduction of contamination. So I'll end it there. Be glad to answer any questions, and thanks again. I appreciate the time here.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Bob. I know Casella's worked really hard to clean up the recycling stream, and thanks for your efforts. I was thinking about your last comments about collaboration, and I think we heard that in the first presentation, that it does take all of those things in order to be successful in the programs. And you outlined some pretty significant challenges, and it's good to hear that you've had so far some success with the pilot. So I think exciting examples with potential successes for the future. So finally, in the cleanup position is Scott Mao, who's Senior Director of Technical Assistance at the Recycling Partnership. Many of you may also recognize Scott for his many years with his career directing the state of North Carolina's state recycling programs. At the Recycling Partnership, Scott is knee-deep in programs to expand and improve recycling in communities across the country. And he's going to talk about some of their successes and tactics and the work at the Recycling Partnership. Scott, it's up to you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan, and many thanks to the CERTIC folks for this opportunity to speak with you all today. As you all know, the Recycling Partnership is a national nonprofit, and you see our tagline there, transforming recycling for good. We really mean three things by that, which is that, recycling is good for the economy, something CERTIC has certainly made a case for many times over the years. It's good for the environment, as we all know. But we're also looking to transform recycling for good in the respect of making permanent change to the effectiveness and performance of the system in the United States. And one of the ways we do that, obviously, is to work across stakeholders, communities, companies, everybody in the value chain to help families recycle in America. Our vision is that folks will have equal access to recycling that they have to garbage, where we have a twinned bin in every aspect of their life. We do that through three main ways: increasing access to recycling, and I should say efficient access to recycling. Obviously, increasing the capture of recyclables. As Michelle was saying earlier, there's a lot of indication there's room for improvement in getting participants to put their materials in the right place, and improving the quality of recyclables, which I'm going to concentrate on today. Just to say something really quickly about this, as folks well know, the partnership it works very hard to get communities to switch over from bin-based collection to cart-based collection, and that may seem a little out of tune with what we're experiencing right now with quality issues, but it's important to know that carts are not a sentence toward contamination. We've worked with many of our grantees that have sustained contamination rates of 10% or lower, and clearly, as Michelle said earlier, in the Pacific Northwest, they're having success with cart-based collection that's under 10%. So it's important for us to increase that access through cart-based collection, but also focus on quality. And we couldn't do that work, obviously, without our many funders, 40 funders here you see on the slide, across the value chain, brand companies, folks involved in the processing and use of materials, who really make it possible for us to do our work. So we appreciate their support very much. But clearly, as we've been discussing on this call, there's the challenge of contamination rates in a down market. So nothing sharpens pencils like a down market. And as folks look at the value of materials coming through MRFs, contamination is certainly rising to the fore as an issue we must all take on head on. So at the partnership, we're doing that through the development of tools and through projects where we get to test and then implement and share what we think works. And here are the key elements of that. Doing homework, making sure that we know what kind of contaminants are causing the most problems. Bob's slide earlier was a great indication of that. So as a MRF, they know what's really causing the trouble. Direct engagement, as Michelle was saying earlier, I like her phrase, feedback at the curb. Around a focused message. You can tell citizens a lot of things, but the key is to tell them that one or two things that you want them to take action on. And you want to integrate those messages with other types of outreach and, of course, measure. So in terms of doing the homework, we encourage communities to work very closely with their MRFs to do what Bob was talking about earlier, to have that conversation about what the key contaminants are. This is really the building block for how you'll create an education and outreach campaign to target contaminants that are causing the most trouble. So that conversation is really important. And then you can take it a step further. Ideally, we love to see MRFs and communities engage in inbound analysis of materials coming in. So you get that secondary fact-based check on what kind of contaminants are causing issues. You can also do things like capture studies where you're looking at the actual contents of sampled carts and what kind of commodities are being captured at a high level, what kind of contaminants are showing up in the recyclables. Those are really key to preparing your outreach effort around contamination. And if you do that work, then you get data like this, which is super important. This is data from some of the projects we did in 2017 in a few large cities around the country. that show measurement before and after interventions to address contamination. I'll share a little bit of that in a minute, but this is one way of looking at it by weight. If you do a capture study, you can also look at it by occurrence, how many folks are putting a certain kind of contaminant in their recycling cart or recycling bin. Again, super important data that drives what you want to do with an outreach program around contamination. So that program, what we recommend is this strategy of direct coordinated engagement. And what we mean by that is you want to do the basic awareness building through info cards and calendars and things like that. You want to, again, give feedback at the curb. You want to link that with mailers and other kinds of outreach that reinforce the message on those tags and the kind of things you're wanting to tell your residents. It's also super important to reject worst case and egregious problems with the carts. If 5% of your cart users are causing 80% of your problems, it's really important to send a message that those carts won't be served. And if all these things are working together, you'll see a reduction in contamination. So as a case in point, we worked in Atlanta last year, helping them with these components I've been talking about, a general mailer, some things that just remind folks what's recyclable, what's not wanted, and then the direct engagement piece, the things that Michelle and Bob both talked about, the cart tagging, some signage, and some mailers that reinforce that message. In the case of Atlanta, based on the capture rate study we did, we found that bagged recyclables was the clear issue there, and so the campaign was focused on not bagging recyclables. And after we did the intervention on the street with cart tagging, mailers, the integrated campaign, that direct engagement, we saw that out of 5 households that put bagged recyclables in previous to the campaign, after that only 2 out of 10 households put bagged recyclables in. So clearly an effect, clearly a sort of vote in favor of this kind of strategy that combines direct engagement with outreach materials that are focused on a key message. In Atlanta, we actually had 2 kinds of demographics, an A and a B demographic, and we were curious to see, does a higher socioeconomic demographic perform better or worse than a lower? And we saw really that we had the same scale of effect in both types of neighborhoods. So you can see the numbers here for yourself, the reduction in bags, but also just the overall reduction in contamination in both groups. In Lowell, Massachusetts is a state that supported our efforts early on to address contamination, to learn what works and what doesn't work. So we really appreciate Mass DEP for their support early that built these tools you're looking at. Some of that early work was in Lowell, Massachusetts. And again, in this case, the emphasis and the focus on bagged recyclables. Before and after, there was this very significant effect on the percentage of bagged recyclables among all the other contaminants. So you can see a very huge reduction there in stuff in bags in Lowell. And we might worry that if you give folks these direct messages, maybe a little bit of a slap on the wrist for what they're doing with the recyclables, that they'll be discouraged. But here's an indication, and we've seen indications in other places as well, that folks really just don't know. And when you give them a clear message to remind them how to recycle right, they stay the course. They maintain their participation in the program, and they get better at giving you what you want. Same kind of results in a project in Chicago, not as intense as the Atlanta campaign, but very similar results in the kinds of contamination we were seeing in carts there. And as we work with other communities around the country, folks who have adopted our strategy and our tools, you see some numbers here that speak for themselves. This reduction in the number of carts that need tagging over time. This is a key metric, and it's a metric that Bob mentioned earlier. We also think a key metric that really hasn't been tested yet is actual reduction in the MRF of contaminants. We're going to get a chance, thanks to some funding from the Ohio EPA, to do that kind of work in in Ohio in 2019, looking at 4 cities, deploying the contamination campaigns I'm talking about in MRF sheds and analyzing the actual contaminant reduction there. And to also hit the point that you can have effects with positive messages in the city of Denver, we worked on using tagging to increase capture of a highly valued material, obviously aluminum cans, and had a very positive effect there. We're doing a second round citywide in Denver, and we should have some results on that soon. But you can use tagging, the same integrated campaign, to increase capture as well. Now, to dive into the tools, the things that we have on our website, the things that we can provide to communities. We have, obviously now an anti-contamination toolkit that was honed and now, being used around the country, honed in Massachusetts, being used around the country. We have a lot of free images and tools that folks can use. We have our quality inspection, a video and training for drivers you see there. And we have a new platform called Campaign Builder. And next number of slides, I'm going to kind of walk through how to access the Campaign Builder and the kind of things that it produces. Again, just to hit the fact again, this is the pathway toward an effective campaign. You do your homework, you get your facts from your MRF, your hauler, you do maybe capture rate studies, you look at the materials, you use that to prepare the focus message of your communications, you get your staff trained up to do effective outreach on the street. Before you hit those feet on the street, you get them to know what they're doing, how to do it, get those core tools in place, and then put them to use, and then of course measure at the back end. So you can see the PDF here, recyclingpartnership.org. PDF builder login. What you'll do when you come to our website is log in or sign up for an account. It's a quick, easy thing to do, free, and then you're off to the races and pulling together some outreach materials for your community. So again, just a quick jump screen where you're going to start to customize your materials. And you see the pieces that we will help you develop with the Campaign Builder, the mailers, the OOPS tag, info card, and then there's a link there to the MRF survey, just to make sure you're covering that base. Folks can then put in some basic information about their community. These are the kinds of pieces of information that start to show up in the graphics of the products that you'll produce for yourself. You'll start to pick the things that matter. And this is, again, where doing that homework really, really is important. What is the main issue? What is the key message that you need to convey to your citizens to move forward? If you don't mind going back just real quickly. And then, you can see there's a number of, sort of buttons you can pick there that drives the selection process going forward. Okay, thanks, Jen. And then additional things that we would want to fill out these information cards and these OOPS tags with, not just your core message, but what other kinds of things do you want to convey on your outreach materials. And because there is some variation around the country in terms of what's collected in the mix, we ask some key questions to make sure we are really in tune with what your program specifies. So you see some questions that drive that conversation here. And because plastics are invariably the most complicated part of the picture, we ask some questions here to just get your sense as a community recycling program, how you want to convey, what is recyclable in terms of plastics. We saw a good example from Bob earlier, focused not on the numbers, but on the kind of shapes and kinds of plastics. And that's an opportunity here as well in these outreach materials. And then we show you, sort of the resulting, answers to your questions. You get a chance to check some of these things, to do some edits. If everything looks good, then you just click through. And then you're to the download stage, and you can download these customized materials for you as a community recycling program to then go to your printer and start your process of sending out to use those OOPS tags on the projects you're going to undertake with that direct engagement on the curb, to basically just equip you with the things that you need to have an effective contamination campaign. And then I also want to remind folks that to help, again, reinforce this message through this direct engagement, we also have a grab and go social media kit, and you see the URL there. This is a set of monthly messages that you can send out to your citizens to give them key prompts and messages about recycling. So you can go in there, download this for yourself, and within that social media kit, there is an anti-contamination message. That's the next slide. So you kind of get a visual of that. So we'd encourage you to do the campaign builder, but also then use the social media kit to do the work. Really appreciate the time with you all today. We don't pretend at the partnership that a cart tagging focus is a silver bullet to contamination. There are a lot of things we need to do to work on this together. MRFs have their own work to do to clean up contamination within their operations. We all have to work hard on that, but we really do think that the evidence shows that direct engagement using cart tags combined with mailers, cart rejection, is an integral part of how any community can effectively address contamination. So again, thank you for your time today. Glad to take any questions.
That's awesome. Thank you, Scott. That toolkit's just great, and I believe it's available for anybody to use, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's free, and download it now.
Awesome. Good. Well, I have a couple questions for each of you, and we have about 4 minutes left. I'll see if I can squeeze one in for each of you. My first is to Jen, though. The question is whether this recording will be available after the webinar, recording of the webinar.
Yes, we are recording currently, and those will be up by the 1st of next week on the CERDIC, SERDC.org website.
Great. And before I forget to, I want to tell everybody that we're going to continue this dialogue in November at the CERDIC Summit in Charleston. So go to the CERDIC.com website for more information and to sign up. It's going to be an awesome summit in a great location. So I would encourage you all to sign up. So if I can, I'm going to try to squeeze in at least a question for each of you. So we'll be fast and furious. One question, Michelle, that came up for you. How do you get to know the community to be effective in that education that you talked about?
I mean, I think it starts with really just having close community ties. I think we rely closely, or we work closely with municipalities to get a sense of what they're doing, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then also in a number of communities we've been servicing them for a long time and kind of know what works. So I think a lot of it is cultural knowledge, so as best you can tap into that. But then I would say that really comes down to research. So by doing surveys or focus groups or any sort of research at the curb you can do, I think anything is better than nothing and will help you start somewhere.
That's great. I was just thinking a little bit about how I think the work that you've done shows that you can achieve success. It takes patience and ongoing dedication, as well as a financial commitment and feet on the street. So it's pretty impressive, including that research piece. Next, a question for you, Bob. How did you notify the community that for your pilot that you are going to begin those bin inspections?
So we have a process at each MRF that we audit material, right? And each customer give a little bit of feedback on the contamination levels for each customer. We document it. We call it data gathering. And obviously a lot of customers are interested in that feedback. So this particular community, they knew they had some challenges in certain areas of their town. And they actually came to us as a host community for Casella and said, listen, can you help us try to reduce the contamination? And we actually, we are the ones that kind of put the 6 folks on the ground, helped them. They actually had a couple of their own folks searching bins, looking at bins, tagging bins. I actually did 1 week, and it was a great experience, to be honest with you. And folks, I mean, there's nothing malicious that's being done from a consumer standpoint, right? Most folks just don't understand why film is not allowed. It's a plastic material, right? It should be recyclable. And you walk them through what it does, from a MRF perspective and the contamination it may cause. So it was really proactive from the community itself based on the feedback we gave them from the audits.
That's great. Thank you. I think actually then that I think leads into my last question that we have time for, which will be of Scott. What is emphasized by contamination in bags?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Susan?
What is emphasized by the contamination in bags effort that you've done?
Okay, that's a good question. So, oftentimes what we've found is that citizens, will bag up, in a plastic bag their recyclables. They are clearly trying to recycle the materials, but they put the materials in their recycling cart in a bag, which leads to two problems. One is it's really hard for MRFs like Bob's to get at. Oftentimes bag materials will just get thrown off the line, especially if they're in bags you can't see through. And you also then introduce a bag into the mix. If that bag breaks and the stuff gets loose, there's still a bag in the mix. So again, based on doing homework, and this is the key thing that folks should remember, what is the issue? If folks are, egregiously bagging recyclables left and right in your community with those problems in mind, then that's a key thing to focus on in a contamination campaign. If, on the other hand, you talk to the MRF and there's been issues with batteries, we'd say don't talk to people about bagging recyclables, talk to them about batteries. So bag recyclables are definitely an issue. We've heard that time and time again from MRFs. Whether or not it's a focus of a community recycling outreach campaign on contamination is really their judgment call in conjunction with the MRF.
That's great. Thank you. Super. Okay, with that, we're out of time. We do have a couple of other questions for each of the speakers that we will take note of, and we will make sure to get that information out. And with that, I want to thank everybody, our speakers, for participating. This was just awesome. CERTIC for hosting the webinar, and to each of you for being on the webinar today and giving your time. Again, remember that we'll be having more of this dialogue at CERTIC Summit in Charleston. Go to the CERTIC website, certic.com, to sign up, and we hope to see you all in Charleston. One more time, thank you to our speakers, and I hope you all have a good rest of the day. Thank you.